So all of Good morning and welcome to this important dialogue focusing on Indigenous languages in the business sector. I trust that you are well and that you are looking forward to this morning's engagement as much as I am. My name is Koketso Sachane and I'm honored to be your host for this morning. I want to first of all acknowledge and thank the institutions that have made this gathering possible. The Pendoring Awards, Fin24, Indigenous Languages Action Forum, and the Pan-African Language Board. This morning, we are going to hear from the following panelists. Mbume Ngobese is the MD at Joe Public Connect. Christoph van der Riede is CEO at Agri SA, and Unati Kondile is the media manager at DK Media Agency. Now, each of our panelists is going to have about 7 minutes each to make their presentation, following which we will have a discussion for about 15 minutes. It is during the discussion where you will, as delegates, have the opportunity to ask questions via the Zoom chat room, which I will ask on your behalf. I'm going to, in the next minute or so, call on Dr. Nomfundo Mali of the Pan South African Language Board to give us the official welcome. But before I do, here is a short video from the Pendoring Awards.
With 277 entries this year, a record high, it was delightful to see brands and agencies beginning to understand the value that Pendoring brings in the industry.
I was particularly impressed with the student work this year. Beautiful, beautiful work and beautifully crafted, great concepts.
Design, in particular publishing, was one that surprised me the most. It was lovely to see the depth of thinking, the quality of concept that went into the design and publishing category.
There were some pieces that did storytelling beautifully. Like those stood out for me. And not only, so they did, it was very emotive, and that was actually lovely to see, you know, when it feels like the person that actually did the work speaks the language, so it spoke to my heart.
I quite enjoyed seeing Imbongi giving praises to some iconic brands that we have in this country, to Okumbule Kaya, work that was flighted during Easter when we were in lockdown so we couldn't travel, and some work that was in beautiful Afrikaans.
You know, there's nothing like cracking the big idea and knowing that it's there. You know, it's happened to us many times, you know, and you just know it's there. So that's the joy. The cherry on top is when you're going to get your award and when it's going to be made public, but well done to everybody.
Molweni, sanbonani, dumela, thobela, dumela, ria dumedisa.
Thank you very much to the Pendoring Awards, incredible work. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to call on Dr. Nomfundo Mali from the Pan South African Language Board to give us the official welcome. Dr. Mali, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Molweni, sanbonani, ahuyamore. Welcome to this seminar, a seminar which will explore the use of Indigenous languages in the business sector. We are happy to have you as participants, as guests and speakers. Today we'll be addressing the use of Indigenous languages in the business sector, and we have a variety of speakers from various backgrounds. They will share and engage us in this topic. This seminar has been made possible by 4 partners: the Pan South African Language Board, which is a constitutional entity which ensures that the 12 official languages, including sign language and the Korean sign languages, they breathe through preservation, development and use for the benefit of all the South Africans. We have Fin24, which publishes a weekly business magazine in Afrikaans and English. We also have Pendoring Awards, which uses advertising in the Indigenous languages as well as in English and Afrikaans. We have ILAF, Indigenous Languages Action Forum, This enables the use of indigenous languages in various sectors and promotion as well of indigenous languages. These 4 partners have made today to be possible. So welcome everybody, feel free to engage and ensure that the dialogue goes on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mali, for your words. As mentioned, we have 3 panelists this morning who will be making a presentation of 7 minutes each, reflecting on the subject of indigenous languages in the business sector. Following the 3 presentations, we'll have 15 minutes discussion where you will be able to ask questions or share your reflections. At any point during any of the presentations, if one of the guests has something that you would like to reflect on or ask questions about, please feel free to post them in the chat box and we will share them during the discussion part of the program. The first of our panelists to make her presentation is Mpumi Ngobese, who is the Managing Director at Joe Public Connect. Over to you, Mpumi.
So I definitely believe that brands are overestimating the emotional reach of the English language. Having worked in advertising all my career, or most of my career, I go through the annual spend, or what brands spend on media year on year. So that, for example, in 2018, 56 billion rand was spent in advertising across all mediums in this country, the biggest spend being in television. And in 2019, the industry spent a whooping 82 billion rand on media. You know, added to that is the fact that almost all the briefs we receive, you'd say over 90% of the brief that we receive ask for work in English. And, you know, and these brands have got pretty much the same challenge that they want to solve. They want to regain market share. They want to attract lapsed users. And, you know, the question that often goes through my mind is, how can you gain market share speaking to people in a foreign language? You know, and that's why I believe that brands are overestimating the emotional connection that the English language delivers. And there's definitely missed opportunities on the part of the brands, you know, in our country. If you look at the top 10 advertisers in 2019, you know, we've got 5 retail brands, we've got 2 insurance brands and 3 FMCG brands that are truly South African that spent the biggest in 2019. And the work out there, or the work that was delivered by them, was completely wallpaper work, if I may say that, but also it was work that doesn't really resonate, you know, and the opportunity that was missed there is, you know, understanding South Africa as a country where storytelling is one of the things that matter to us. You know, we communicate in idioms, we communicate in figures of speech, but all we've seen or all we saw last year was a price war. You know, who's got the biggest flash prize, who has the lowest prize, who's shouting the loudest. You know, I really think, you know, the storytelling opportunities is something that's been missed by the brands. And I think that, you know, with that, brands are facing a lot of threats. Because if you speak in English or if you speak in one language in this country, you are missing quite a chunk of people in the country, you know. Then you're faced with loss of relevance. You know, if brands are supposed to be the fabric of society, if brands are supposed to connect with the rest of the population, then I really think that, you know, they're faced with big threats, threat of being irrelevant or threat of dying. I've seen many iconic brands dying and struggling to revive themselves. You know, and it is for this reason that I admire the likes of Pendoring Awards, because not only does the Pendoring Award drive for transformation and diversity, they encourage inclusion. they respect, they celebrate, and they acknowledge the importance of language, the importance of culture. And I really implore brands in this country to begin to shift their perspectives and to begin to understand the value that, you know, language would deliver on their brand. And the mistake that brands often make is that they think it is efficient to communicate in one language. There is no, I can't believe it, because it is so incredibly inefficient to think that you can spend 82 billion rand in this country and communicate in one language when our country has got so much diversity and so many language. And yeah, I really think brands need to reevaluate the role that they play in our society.
Thank you very much to Mpumi Ngobese for your presentation. Our next panelist to share with us his thoughts is Christo van der Riede, who is the CEO at Agri SA. Over to you, Christo.
Today I will talk about language and the role language plays to drive economies all over the world. Now, what is very important is that without language there can be no economy. People use language to do all kinds of transactions. They will buy, they will sell, they will produce, they will do all kinds of economic activities in a particular language. If you take it to the next level, language becomes part of a commercial transaction, a more formalized commercial transaction. And here people use all kinds of contracts, people use a range of other tools, language tools, to secure a particular contract between various people involved in an economic activity. At the next level, language can also be used to produce specific products. If you use that analogy in the commercial world, you will have three phases before you can actually produce a product. On the one hand, you have the production side. At the next level, you will have the processing side, and then last but not least, the consumption side. When it comes to language production, your schools, all kinds of institutions, universities, colleges play a big role to provide the necessary skills, whether it's language skills or other types of skills that a person can use to produce a specific product. And this is very important because you need skills in various sectors. In a particular sector, such as the publishing sector, language is used as a tool to convey news, to convey all kinds of other messages. In social media, it is also particularly used to drive a particular message. So language is used in the public sector as a driver to produce books, to produce newspapers, to produce magazines, to produce social media articles, to produce all kinds of content. You need people that have the necessary skills and knowledge and the know-how to use language in a particular fashion in order to produce a product, whether it's for the print media or the social media, wherever it is required. What is even more fascinating, if you produce a book, then you need an author or you need a writer. If you produce a social media product, then you need specific people that can deliver that content in the specific language. But in addition to that, you create a multitude of jobs because now you need editors, you need people that can operate a printing machine, you need book binders. In the media industry, you will require advertisers that will put an advert together in a particular language so that that advert attract buyers for a specific product. The number of jobs that are created within that particular value chain, it is too many to mention at this point in time. So you need an author on the production side, you need various other skills to process and to produce a specific language product, whether it's a book or a newspaper or a magazine or social media content. And then on the consumption side, you need people that understand that language, people that have a need to read that newspaper in that particular language, or to read that book in that specific language, or to gain access to a particular social media content. People need to understand that language. So in the Afrikaans community, we have succeeded over many decades to create a value chain that can produce products not only for the local markets but also for the global markets, because you have many people living overseas that access Afrikaans books or Afrikaans magazines. Take for example Netwerk 24, or take any other publishing company that produce books in Afrikaans. They will make these books available electronically or in print fashion. But it's not Afrikaans that has this ability, or that has developed this ability to create various products, whether it's for the print media, whether it's for television, for the film industry, and for a range of other industries. Many languages all over the world have developed that specific know-how and ability. The English language, for example, is a language that is consumed globally. Thousands, millions of English books are produced, and it is shipped to countries all over the world. The sad part of that is, if you neglect your indigenous language, whether it's Xhosa, Zulu, or Afrikaans, then you become a mere consumer of English books, for example. It might be French books or books written in other languages. If you do not create films or videos in indigenous language, people become dependent, or they merely consuming products that are delivered via Netflix and via the internet to South African people. And they become mere consumers of American films. Now the big question is, who will benefit financially from it? It will be obviously an American institution like Netflix, a company. It will be the American writers, screenwriters, script writers. It will be the American artists, the film makers, the actors. They will be the beneficiaries of the value chain, or the product that they've created through a particular value chain, which is not here in South Africa, but it has been created overseas. Now there's certainly nothing wrong with importing films and books and all kinds of language products from a different country, from another country. All that I'm arguing is to say, do not neglect your own language. There must always be a balance between imports and exports. If you become too reliant on imports from another country, what happens? You impoverish yourself. Money flows out of the country. You fail to create jobs for your own people through a particular language. And in South Africa, where we have this massive spike in unemployment, massive spike in people losing their jobs due to COVID, this massive spike in people not earning a salary to create a better future for themselves. This is the wrong way to become more and more reliant on products that come from a different country. Now is the time for us to invest in our own languages, indigenous languages in particular. Now is the time for us to explore the multitude of opportunities that our indigenous languages produce, and start creating and investing in value chains. In other words, language, economic value chains that are driven by language, where language is used to produce products, whether it's in the publishing industry, whether it is in the film industry, in the entertainment industry, and all kinds of other industries. And that's where the opportunities lie for South Africans in particular, not just to be mere consumers, but to be the actual producers of wealth through their own languages. I trust that the paper that I've written will be used as a basis to explore and create value change that can bring about a greater economic wealth creation for a particular language community, wealth creation via job creation, via content creation, and via the use of all kinds of technologies to, at the end of the day, deliver a specific language product.
Thank you very much to Christoph van der Riede for your insightful reflections, much appreciated. A reminder to you as our delegates that this discussion is being recorded and it will be shared across a number of platforms. And I look forward to you engaging with the panelists and us being able to have a discussion amongst ourselves on this very important topic. We will, in the next few minutes, open up the virtual floor for those questions and reflections. So please do continue to share them via the chat box. Our third and final panelist for this morning is Unati Kondile, who is the media manager at DK Media Agency. Over to you, Unati.
Let me start by thanking the organizers of today's event, as well as everyone who is watching today. I think we are at a point in society where we all know what the problems are. We are good at identifying these problems and pontificating about them on Twitter and Facebook and all other social networks. But what we need now are people who are actually going to invest or take time to actually implement some of these things. So I'm hoping that in and amongst us, as we gather here today, there are those people who will be interested in taking these ideas further. I arrived in the Eastern Cape in 2015, and there were about 40 community newspapers. They were owned by community members. They were not, and yeah, I'm excluding the number of those that are owned by Times Media or Arena Holdings today or Media 24. They've got their own express titles. So community newspapers, we had 40 of those. And today, in 2020, 5 years later, we've got 8 of those left. From that 8, we've got about 3, only 3 of those newspapers that publish in isiXhosa purely. Some have become hybrid and they include English. Now, the problem here is what is wrong? Why have these newspapers disappeared? And I'll tell you why. It's partly because most of them are owned by business people. Business people who come into the industry are aware of the opportunities that exist for funding these newspapers. So these newspapers are not being done by people who actually understand journalism or have some invested interest in developing vernacular languages. So they, for instance, will know that there's a fund from the Media Development Agency. They'll know that there are tenders from municipalities for vernacular newspapers. So someone will come in and do a newspaper on those grounds. So you get these fly-by-nights newspapers that come in and they just disappear after a while. So we have that problem whereby in which we need more people who are going to be invested in working on the language. When we started isiXhosa isiXhosa, we invited professors in isiXhosa, language practitioners from all over the country, or Dr. Ncedile Saule, or Dr. Nomsa Satyo, to come on board and work with us. And indeed, they showed us how to write these things, lexicography, grammar here, cut the words here, don't write sentences like this, this is how you spell certain words. And we got it right. Today, Solezo is a profitable newspaper. It trends regularly online when you see our posters because we are writing the language right and we're putting the content out there in the manner in which it should be. So we need more people. There's room for growth. From 40 newspapers to 3 is quite a tragedy. So there's room for growth, and I would encourage people to start their own community newspapers, but also consult and make sure that these things are professionally done. Similarly so, still in the arena of publishing, we've got books, Xhosa books. Now, this is a very tricky one because you've got people writing Xhosa books and putting them in bookstores, and then bookstores saying these books don't sell. Now, if you look at these books in the bookstores, what the content that we have there, I don't necessarily like novels. I don't like poetry. I'm more interested in business books, self-help, motoring, and we don't have those in isiXhosa. I was speaking to Ukaya Dlanga, who had written a book at a book fair. This was about 4 years ago, and I said, you need to translate your book into isiXhosa. We laughed it off, largely because it would cost money to do this, and yeah, he just didn't see a market for the book. I, at the back of my mind, thought, well, these are the type of people we need to get published in the vernacular. They're writing from a point of view of the township as well as rural areas, and they're writing this in very colloquial English. So if you could do the same thing with this Xhosa, put that funny, quirky Kaya voice into the book and put it out there. And use that social media following that he has to promote the book. So we get people who are popular from the language group to write more content in the languages so that people first get used to reading these languages. So that would be a starting point for books. But there's also the other aspect of which businesses can play a bigger role for vernacular languages, and that's in competitions. I know that the CEO of CNA is now sponsoring the literary awards that happen every year here. So they're putting in more money into these literary awards because they would like to incentivize and encourage more African writers, more vernacular writers to actually enter these awards. And so that's a very interesting space that's happening there. AFBOB has done a similar thing as well. AFBOB runs a poetry competition, and in that poetry competition, you're finding that they worked with us. And we invited people from across the board in the Eastern Cape to submit their poems written in the vernacular. And we got hundreds of these things sent to us. And then we forwarded these to AFBOB. So by creating competitions, big business can play a role in the development of these languages. We get to see more writers, more new voices through businesses funding these things. So as I conclude, you know, we need to think about these things, that there are lots of opportunities in terms of apps, books, newspapers, but it all entails knowing your market and producing content that speaks to your market and writing these languages professionally. You know, I know that the Eastern Cape Department right now is also developing a Languages Act, which compels every government department to have a languages unit, so all content will be translated into the vernacular as well. But translation is not enough. We need people to conceptualize documents, write documents in the vernacular, and once we can do that, it means that people will have to first read the vernacular versions of these things. We create more jobs for those people, we increase the profile of the languages, and it's a win-win situation, really. So we have a long way to go. There are still a multitude of opportunities for our languages, and ndihleli ethembeni lokuba sizawuzenza zonke izinto de iilwimi zethu sifikele kwinqanaba lokuba nazo sikhuphisane nezinye iilwimi ezifana nesiNgesi nezinye ke ezinkulu zwelonke. Enkosi kakhulu.
Thank you so much, Unati, for your reflections. Thank you very much as well to Christo and to Mbume as well. And I see a number of you as delegates have asked a series of questions, and I am looking forward to going through them. And I apologize for the noise that just suddenly appeared from my neighbors. This is the joys of working from home. But I think very quickly, if I could just ask the question, starting with Mbume, I want you to, if you could, please speak a bit more on the overestimation of the English language and the consequence of that when it comes to accessibility of people to messages from brands.
Yes, so I strongly believe that the English language is completely overestimated. And if it wasn't, brands wouldn't be in the current positions that they're in. So pretty much all brands are in trouble because they all actually, you know, have lost market share, or they're all trying to tap into new markets, but they don't know how. And in them not knowing how, they still fall into the trap of wanting to speak to these people in English. When you think about 80% of our population being non-English speakers, and if you think about the issues that brands are facing, and yet they continue to fall into this trap of assuming that speaking to the 80% of the population will make them stick or will make them connect. I think it's a flawed assumption by brands that, you know, in fact, I think it's a lazy assumption to think that they will be able to connect to the people that they want to connect with.
And maybe whether it's yourself, Mpumi, or maybe Unathi, I can bring you in to answer the question that we received from Esther, saying most brand products for commercial consumption, like food items, currently use English and Afrikaans in the packaging. It is so difficult to add information about the product in at least 2 or 3 indigenous languages. Seeing their own language on these products will enhance people's respect and sense of identity. In India, often up to 6 or 7 languages are sometimes found on products. Maybe you can just take that, Mpumi, and then allow Unathi to respond to that as well.
Right. From my perspective, I think that packaging plays a certain role in communicating with one's audience, but there are other channels that brands can potentially use in communicating with their audiences. It's incredibly expensive, you know, to change packaging all the time, but if brands are communicating to the consumers regularly, I think it's valid for them to explore other channels that are more affordable. We've got TV, we've got radio, we've got social media, and it's quite easy to, you know, communicate in those channels and not necessarily because it's such an expensive asset to change.
Right. Unathi, your reflections? I don't think Unathi is available anymore, but maybe if we could just look at a couple of more of your questions. And I really would encourage, if possible, if you could also, in the chat, if you'd like to answer, if you'd like to answer some of the questions as well, let's have the discussion. I think it's going to be very important. But we did receive a question earlier from Dr. Munir Abdurov, who asked a question. It was stated that using English alone is not the best way, as a large part of the society is left out. Do you have a practical solution as to how to incorporate all languages within the brand sector? Mpumi, I see that Unathi is not around, but I would like to maybe just call on you as well on this. Dr. Christopher Nderieda also not available, and hopefully he will be able to answer questions via email as well, if anyone has got questions that they would like to direct to him directly. I see, Unathi, we've got you back. So maybe if we can bring you in here on the question around practical solutions as to how to incorporate all languages within the brand sector. The idea, of course, that with English being the dominant language, it does leave people out. So how do we bring all other languages within the brand and advertising? And you reflected on the publishing sector as well, Unathi, if you want to reflect on that. Okay, we've got some challenges, but I want to maybe in the meantime, if you can stand by to answer this question. I saw behind Christopher Nderieda's, as he was sitting, there was a photo of the late former President Nelson Mandela, which reminded me of one of the quotes from him where he speaks about how if you speak to somebody in their language, you speak to their heart. And I find it unfortunate, and I'm glad that we're able to have this discussion, but I find it unfortunate that at this time in our country in 2020, we're still grappling with some of these challenges. And I appreciate the work that, of course, the Pendoring are doing in making sure that we move forward. And there was a mention earlier of the transformation part of the industry and how that in itself impacts on the messaging and the languages that are used in order to access all South Africans. But Mpume, on that, the question of why has it taken so long and why is it taking so long for us to be at a place where this is not even an issue to grapple with? Is it a transformation issue? What's happening within the industries, whether it be media, advertising, publishing?
So it's a whole host of factors. And I think that because brands are so institutionalized and there is a lack of understanding from the brand owners' parts, how important language is in connecting with their people. They just take it for granted that the communication that they develop, as long as it's understood by them, then it works. They're taking this thing so for granted, and it's so tragic to see that, when we try and convince the brands to speak to the market in a relevant manner, we get a lot of pushback. And the pushback comes from fear. They think that by doing things out of the ordinary, which is tragic on its own, that speaking to people in the indigenous languages is out of the ordinary. So they're driven completely by fear. They're driven by anxiety and the fact that the corporates are institutionalized is the biggest driver on what we're seeing today currently. And hopefully, as we are starting now to have this conversation, hopefully that a lot of the people that are on the brand side are in the seminar so that they really understand the inefficiencies that are happening in advertising and communication.
Unathi, in your presentation, I really love the fact that you spoke about how we need to go beyond the pontificating on these issues, and you put forward practical solutions as to what you have done. And I want you to reflect on this question as a solution, some advice that is being sought. The person asking or saying, the reason I started my business was purely because of this need to use native languages in our primary form of communication. My struggle now is approaching corporates with my unique selling proposition. So the question is this for you, Unathi: how do I, as a native brand communicator, approach corporates with such an offering? What can this person do?
It's a very difficult question, but you have to show the benefits of that. If you're going to approach corporate, for example, I approached a restaurant which has grown quite significantly in the Eastern Cape. And I had to literally tell them what languages these people speak and what value it would add if they did adverts in that language. So you have to come with a value proposition for that particular business that you approach. If you want them to take you seriously. It might take a while because some of these things have been planned out for an entire year. So they might only start responding to you properly after a year, but it's worth a shot. It's worth approaching them directly, meeting their marketing managers, meeting their communications directors, and getting that message across.
This discussion reminds me of, I dabble in radio at some point in my life, and I want to stay with you on this, Unathi. And we had a discussion around the history of the Afrikaans language. And one of the contributors to the discussion, listeners, there was a brief argument, if you will, about the importance or not of Afrikaans language or English as a language of commerce, and people advocating for the need to maybe learn Mandarin because of this idea of what the Chinese economy is and what it means and the opportunities there. But what I found in all of that, and which is central to this discussion, is that there seems to be a lack of importance placed on our indigenous languages also as a language of commerce. If one does a lot of work in KZN, you can go into a boardroom, whether it be corporate sector or business or government, where isiZulu is the language commerce. So speak to us about that. What's happening with us where we don't see the importance of our indigenous languages as a language of communication, but also as a language of commerce?
Yeah, it has to do a lot with money. I think, let me go back to the Afrikaans example. There we can learn a lot. And I think we're not using that example to the fullest in terms of how Afrikaans was developed in this country and how it was implemented and put into businesses and all other government sectors. I think we need to look at that very closely. But when it comes to actually the value of the languages, people want to know what are they going to get, from these languages. A mother will come to you and say, "Umntana wam uzawufumana ntoni ngesiXhosa?" What is my child going to gain from doing this Xhosa or studying Xhosa or actually translating all these documents into Xhosa? Because we have not seen the commercial side of these languages. So it's up to us, those who are already doing, to create opportunities for people to see the value of our languages. If Umtu does not see the exit or the light at the end of the tunnel with these languages, they're really not going to come to the party. So we need to show them that there is some form of light at the end if they do take their languages seriously. For now, Abantu are not seeing the value of it.
Right. And I suppose the value comes from showing the value by actually being in action. I want to read a question, or rather reflections from Dr. Rieder. And I know that in the chat box, there are some questions that have been posed to him. But this is what Christo says, that non-white Afrikaans speaking communities must focus on creating their own media platforms should there be an appetite to create their own content in Afrikaans or any other language. Such a platform must be underpinned by solid commercial principles that will attract investors, community of Afrikaans-speaking people who are prepared to fund such a business venture via a shareholding scheme or individual investors, and that will serve as the architecture for a solid business plan. Nobody will take responsibility for somebody else's language. The protection, promotion, and commercialization of an indigenous language remains the prerogative of its speakers. Both of you, if you could reflect on that. Let's start with you, Mpume. Reflections on that. The responsibility of the language speaker being able to create their own, if we stick to media platform, you will, and the commercialization of it. While I understand it, is it easy?
I was actually gonna start there. Is it easy? Do we have the resources? Do we have the capital? But also, there are platforms that exist across the country. So I think the trick is to fully utilize what has already been established instead of starting new platforms. Should we not start with that low-hanging fruits before we begin to invent new platforms? That would be my perspective.
Unathi, you've grappled with this, looking at or going back to your presentation and what you said about what you needed to do. You've grappled on this issue of the easiness of being able to develop your own products, if you will, your own platforms.
Yeah, I think we need to find more people who can do these things. I don't know where they're hiding, but I know that I'm one of the people who can do. I can create any newspaper overnight. So I'm sure there are many other people who can create products. We just need to find people who can do these things. It's not enough to say that we've got big radio stations that speak vernacular languages if we can't even start our own community radio stations. The funding is there. We just need to familiarize ourselves with how to get these applications right and create more platforms for our languages. So in the media, it's not so much about resources, but more about people who can do. We need more doers in the space of media in the country, because we still have a lot of opportunities that can be explored.
There's a question here from Michael Joseph, and I'm just going to stay with you, Unathi, in the publishing space. And Michael saying, our experience in Makanda shows that AVBOB gave mobile libraries as prizes to isiXhosa Medu schools, but all the books were in English. They said that there are no African language publishers. And I want to add on to that. I'm a father, while my youngest is 1.5 years. I live in Cape Town, I'm Mopedi, and I've been struggling to find Sepedi books in general, Sepedi children's books in general. There are a few that exist, and I've had to, bring in some from Johannesburg, and there are incredible authors like Itaboho Maluzi, who is doing some amazing work. But again, it goes back to the question of the number of publishers that we have that publish in our indigenous languages. And specifically as a father, my interest is children's books, and we don't have enough of them.
I think there's a growing number of children's content in the country. I can see that we've got participants like Uxolisa Kuzula here, who also has translated quite a number of close-up books for children. There's Boa Books, there's a number of companies are producing these books for children. I suppose now they struggle to get them into the mainstream bookstores, which is a question we also have to explore in terms of opening our own bookstores or availing these things online. Yeah, it's a tricky one in terms of book publishing. Are people publishing the content people want to read? Is the question. So we really have a long way to go, as I keep repeating myself. People need to start writing these books. We need to make it easier for people to submit their manuscripts to publishers, especially in the vernacular. Right now, yes, it's pretty hard to find these books, but we have to start.
Yeah, most definitely. I need to curb myself, because the truth is I can go on when it comes to these discussions, but we do need to wrap it there. Thank you very much for all your comments and questions via the chat box. And I think that the team would be in a position to possibly have the presentations made available in written form, which is what one of the questions that we received earlier on, as to whether or not these presentations that yourselves have made would be available. So thank you very much once again to Unati Kondile, Media Manager at DK Media Agency, Christopher Nderiede, who's CEO at AgriSA, and to Mpume Ngobese, who's the MD at Joe Public. What I am going to do now is just to call on from the Pendoring board and also report editor Valdemar Pelser for your summation. Thank you very much, Valdemar, for joining us. So over to you.
Okay, so thank you so much for navigating us through that fascinating discussion. Before I summarize, I want to start with a word of thanks. The Indigenous Language Action Forum, or ILAF, and their sponsor, the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, as we mentioned, organizations that are involved in the Indigenous language space. We want to thank them from Pendoring for helping us to conceptualize this year's inaugural Pendoring Business Seminar, which of course we hope we'll repeat every year. And at the end, I'm happy that we'll announce a new partner for Pendoring, but we'll get to that. So Mpumi Ngubesi from Joe Public was first. Some staggering numbers there: 82 billion rand spent last year on media in South Africa, and 90% of the briefs were in English, the briefs that Joe Public and the rest of the industry were asked for. This is staggering because Mpumi says this represents a huge missed opportunity. Advertisers overestimate the emotional reach of English and the connection that you can really form with the majority of our country who do not speak English at home. And this costs them in rands and cent in market share. Of the top 10 advertisers in this country, mostly South African brands, 5 retail, insurance, and fast-moving consumer goods. She says their work in the past year was wallpaper work, which just didn't resonate. Why does it not resonate? Because South Africa is a nation of storytelling. We communicate in idioms, in figures of speech, but all we saw last year, says Mpumi, is a price war whose product is the cheapest. That's hardly creative. Brands shouldn't compete on who can shout the loudest. If we speak only in English, you miss a huge chunk of people and can be faced with relevance, or brands even dying. So she says she admires Pendoring because it encourages inclusion, respect, and the celebration of Indigenous and vernacular languages and culture. In conclusion, brands make a mistake if they think it is efficient to communicate in one language, but it is inefficient to think you can spend 82 billion and communicate in one language in a country as diverse as ours. Brands need to reevaluate the role they play in our society. They're part of the fabric of society. That's from Mpumi Ngobesi at Joe Public. Dr. Christy van der Rede started by saying, without language, of course, there's no economy. People buy and sell in languages, but then there's also the language-intensive economies of book publishing, media, entertainment, film, and the like, around which, if you know your business, you can create fantastic value chains that also create jobs. We've seen this in South Africa, where firstly, you need producers who are skilled at school, colleges, and university to produce language products. This, of course, includes advertising, and you need consumers, an involved market who have a demand for what the authors and the filmmakers and the advertisers produce. He uses the example of the Afrikaans community that has created successfully a value chain, mostly focused, of course, at the domestic market being Afrikaans, but which is increasingly exported to Afrikaans speakers who move around the world. But not only Afrikaans has this ability. Of course, English is the main example of how you can create cultural goods for export. But we have become, says Christo, net consumers of English exports, mainly from the US. This means we neglect many of our indigenous languages and become consumers of other people's cultural products. If we don't create films, Christy says, in indigenous languages, people are reduced to consume what is imported, mainly from the US. He says, very importantly, as we look at the unemployment crisis now, who benefits financially from the dominance, for example, of Netflix and other American cultural institutions? Definitely not South African actors, filmmakers, but those in what I'd call the global north. We lap up these products and we send our money abroad. We should strive for balance. We should not neglect our own. In conclusion from Christo, becoming too reliant on imports impoverishes us. We should work on our balance of cultural trade, it seems. Right. From Unati Kondile at DK Media Agency, a newspaper, a passionate newspaper man like myself, he said, we're good at pontificating. Now we need investors and actors to take these ideas forward. In the Eastern Cape, there's been a huge contraction in the number of community newspapers there in isiXhosa. Why do these newspapers disappear? Unati guesses that this is because many business people become involved, not because their heart is truly in the industry, in journalism, or in the language industry, but they see it purely as a business opportunity. And when a subsidy or a contract falls away, they exit the industry. We need more people who are skilled in our vernacular languages to invest in book publishing and newspapers. He uses isiLezwe lesiXhosa as an example, which is profitable today, trends often online, because he says we write the language professionally and in a way that people want to read. There was a question, of course, later about, do we publish and write that which the audience and readers have a desire for? And at isiLezwe, clearly that is the case. There are some Xhosa books, but not in every sector. Where are the self-help books? Where are the business books, the motoring books? Can an industry be developed around that? There is a role of business, says Unati. He mentions CNA, which sponsors literary awards to incentivize writers who produce in the vernacular in South Africa. AFBAB was mentioned, and we heard also about that problem with sourcing isiXhosa books for the libraries that were donated in the Eastern Cape. But in that competition that Unati mentioned, hundreds of entries were received in isiXhosa. So there are opportunities everywhere, but write with professionality, he says. In the live discussion, just very, very briefly, Mpumi emphasized the overestimation of English, she says brands would be commercially stronger if they use these other opportunities. Vernacular languages can help brands tap into new markets. Speaking only in English, as we are doing now, is a trap because you speak to 80% of our country in what is in essence a foreign language. Corporates are, however, driven often by fear of dipping their toe into this new market. And she expressed the hope that many people on the brand side who might be listening today might seize these opportunities. It's a huge value add, which reminds Unati, which needs to be explained to corporates. We can't just assume that they will see the value in what we do when we produce in the vernacular. We must make a business case to them. Money talks. Mpume reminded one of our participants that platforms do exist for the development of vernacular language products. There are some low-hanging fruit with which we could start, but we need, says Unati, more doers. In conclusion, Unati asked, are people publishing the content people want to read? That is the question. From us, I just thank you so much for a fantastic conversation. That's in summary what I took from it. Koketso, thank you so much. And before Koketso concludes, we have an announcement to make. Hollard has joined Pendoring, as you may have seen at the outset, as a partner. When we started the video, which Koketso showed, it said, Pendoring etundwa ke Hollard. They'll be with us hopefully for many, many years. And we thank them for their support for what we believe is a truly important and fantastic initiative. Now over to the little Hollard billboard and then to Koketso. Thanks.
Molweni, sanibonani, dumela, thobela, dumelang, ria dumedisa.
Thank you very much, Valdemar, and congratulations to Pendoring for Hollard coming on board. This has been, I mean, I appreciate the discussions that we've had today, and I see in the chat box, just going back to the discussion around publishing children's books, people mentioning Mpumi's Magic Beads. Oh yeah, definitely. I've got those. Labahang Masango is somebody that has assisted in access to those books for the little one, as well as Refilo Mahludi as well. So thank you very much. And the links that I see there, much appreciated. I just want to remind you, if at all, of course, you did not have the opportunity to have your questions asked and you would still like to be in touch with our panelists, we can do so via Pendoring, and I'm sure they will be in a position to share your questions or comments with the panelists. You can email hello@pendoring.co.za. That is hello@pendoring.co.za. Thank you very much again to the panelists, to all of you who have been part of the discussions. And thanks to the Pendoring team for inviting me to be part of this very, very important discussion. Much appreciated. You have a good day.